thanks to the marvel of eBay, we get to have a little bit of a time travel experience and look at some Bibles from the 1980s. These are New King James Bibles from the 1980s that are actually in pretty good condition. So this is really cool. I have seen pictures of these Bibles, the Imperial Reference Bible and the Royal Reference Bible, New King James, but I've never had them in person, never seen them in person. So I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to be able to look at these and to show them, because I don't think there are many videos on YouTube about these Bibles. The first thing you notice is the design of the box from the 1980s, a little bit different looking than boxes now. And I did notice that with the description here, there seems to be more details about the content of the Imperial Reference Bible compared to the Royal Reference Bible content description. But then on the binding description, you actually have less information here than what you have on the Royal Reference Bible. So I'll just let you look at what they say about each of these Bibles. One of the things that I really liked about this Royal Reference Bible box is the slogan they have for the New King James Version, "The Accurate One." I think that slogan is definitely very forward, very direct. You know, that's one way to put it. It's funny because I saw even a more recent edition of the New King James that had a slogan on the front that said something like, "The best Bible for study," something like that. So the New King James Version doesn't hold back in their marketing as to how good they think their translation is. Actually, in more recent years, I haven't seen anything quite that bold, but I do like that. I think that's kind of funny to me. The Accurate One. Now, these Bibles were produced when the New King James Version was actually pretty new. When we look inside, you'll see that this one is actually from 1985, and the New King James Version only came out in 1982. This one is 1989, so this is the same decade as the New King James was actually produced. You see the Thomas Nelson Bibles logo here, and I'm sure there are people who really miss this logo. It's definitely a product of its time. Nelson Bibles has, I think, like a house for their logo now, and I'm not sure why they have that house. So I think this logo looks a little bit dated, but it's kind of cool. They could bring it back. It's kind of retro. And then on the bottom here, you have the guarantee, which says they'll replace the Bible if there are any defects if you return it within 1 year of the date of purchase. Well, I think that's void now. I purchased these secondhand, and even if you did return it, I don't think they have these Bibles around in stock anymore. But these are cool boxes. You can see the one on the left is thumb indexed. You can see a little bit of the difference in font size here. That was one of the things I was really curious about, is what is the font size of these Bibles? So we'll take a look at that. The font in the Imperial Reference is a little bit bigger. It is a little bit bigger Bible. And those are the stock numbers for the Bibles with a little bit of information. The back of the boxes, or the bottom of the boxes, is just like a gold look to them. They are two-piece. And I have to say, for being decades old, they're still shiny and in pretty good condition, as are the Bibles, which we'll see. And I know that's what you've been wanting to see. So we'll take a look at these Bibles. So here's the Imperial Reference. Here is the Royal Reference. And as you can see, the Imperial is a little bit bigger. It is a little bit over 8 inches tall, about 8 1/4, and it's a little over 5.5 inches wide, and then it is about 1.25 inches thick. The Royal Reference is more like 7 3/4 inches high, 5 1/4 inches wide approximately, and about 1 1/8 inches. So the Royal Reference is a little smaller, a little tiny bit thinner maybe than the Imperial Reference. As you can see, the copy that I have here was engraved. That is not my name, and I don't know who that person is. But what's really fascinating is that this Bible was hardly used. There are still pages that are stuck together. So, I mean, this text block is in really good condition. And there are some people who would say that this would be a great rebind candidate. However, this is the burgundy genuine leather cover, and I kind of find it to be charming, just to see what the original covers actually looked like in such good condition. So I don't think I'm going to rebind this. I really like the nostalgia of the look of this Bible in its original cover. This is a bonded leather. It's interesting, it actually says on the back, genuine bonded leather. So I'm not sure what non-genuine bonded leather is, but both of them I think are a stamped grain. The Royal Reference does have Holy Bible printed on the front. The spines on both of these kind of have slightly raised hubs. And it's kind of a busy look to it. It has a lot stamped on there, probably a little bit too much for my taste. But again, it's really nostalgic. Both of these Bibles also have a ribbon marker. This one is actually in really good condition, angle cut. The one on this Bible feels really nice. Actually, I think might be silk. So if you think they have some nice ribbons today, I would say in terms of material, this is nicer than anything I have felt recently. However, the end of that ribbon isn't all that nice. And I don't really like the color of this ribbon in relation to the color of the Bible itself, or the cover itself. Both of them have a tooled line on the edge, although the line on this one is barely noticeable. You could probably barely see it on the camera there, but it is there. They're both paste down construction on the inside. And with this one, the Imperial, which is a little bit bigger Bible, there is actually overcast stitching here. And I don't know if you can see that, but there is an extra line of stitching on this signature. So that just gives extra reinforcement to hold this Bible together. But both of these are a sewn binding. Another feature they both have is on the outside you have a gilt line. It's actually not just a line. It actually is a designed pattern to it. So I really like the classic look of both of these Bibles. And another really interesting thing is that they actually are the same pagination. So you can see here we're on page 1030, 1031, and we're at the book of Jonah. Now I will say the Royal Reference edition that I have is printed a little bit more darkly, but both of them are very readable. They have really good line spacing, and I have to say, this Bible here, the Imperial, is actually in that perfect size Bible range that I talk about, the Goldilocks size Bible. To me, it's kind of so perfect for being able to read pretty easily, but also very easy to hold and to carry, take with you places. This one is a little bit smaller, but it's printed so nicely that it's still quite readable. I'm going to compare both of these to some other Bibles just so you get a feel for how they look compared to other Bibles we have from more recent times. But as you can see here, the Royal Reference is a little bit smaller, more what you would probably call today a personal size Bible, although interestingly, the Imperial Reference Bible is similar to the size of a lot of large print personal size Bibles that we have today. So these were not line matched. However, the paper in these, and I think you can see this, is really nice. And this Bible was hardly used. As I said, pages still stuck together in some places. So you really get to see what the paper was like brand new. And I think you can tell there's really not a lot of ghosting there. I believe the total page count for the biblical text is 1,393 pages. So not as few pages as some thin lines necessarily, but also not as many pages as some regular reference Bibles. So I think it's really a happy medium, and the page thickness is, it's not thick, but it's enough to where you get really good opacity. And I just think for whatever reason back then, the paper they were using was really good in terms of opacity. Let's look at the front here. This is the presentation page. Title page. And this shows you the print information. It does say that it was printed in the United States of America, and there is the date, 1985. This one also is thumb indexed. Now that's probably one of the weaknesses of this Bible. The printing on those thumb index markers is not really the sharpest, but it still looks really nice. And look at the gold on that from 1985. Wow, pretty impressive. Now, one of the interesting features of this Bible that I was noticing is that the prose sections, which you see on the left-hand side there of each page, are a little bit larger font than the poetry, from what I can tell. That was actually a really smart idea. As I said, you get good line spacing in this Bible, but one of the ways that they save space, because poetry, if you use poetic setting, takes up a lot of space, is they made the print for the poetry a little bit smaller, which not only saves space, but also you get more words per line in the poetry than you would if you kept it the exact same font size. So I'm pretty sure that this poetry is actually a little bit smaller font than what you see over here in the prose. In the Imperial reference that I have here, I measured this at about a 9-point font. And the poetry is more like an 8-point, I believe. And I think that in the Royal reference, you're looking at 1 point lower for each of these fonts. So I am amazed actually at what they were able to pack into the form factor, the size of each of these Bibles. It's actually really a pretty good size font for the size of the Bible. One other thing I will look at here in each of these Bibles is the red print for the words of Christ, which I know a lot of people don't like red print. Let's take a look at that. On the other hand, a lot of people do like red print, but as you can see here, there is a difference. The Royal Reference generally is printed darker, and that includes the red ink here. But there's also a little bit more noticeable inconsistency with red ink printing. So that's what it looks like in Luke. If we look here at the book of John, I would say that in this section at least, the red is a little bit darker. And then at the end here in the book of Revelation, the red is actually quite dark. I wish it was printed this dark throughout the whole Bible. So comparing to Bibles today, I think what you'll see is actually there's probably more print consistency in Bibles today in terms of how dark the print is, especially if you're looking at higher end Bibles. So let's look at both of these in comparison to some more recent Bibles. As far as the size, I would say that this one here, which I say is like a Goldilocks size, reminds me a lot of the ESV large print thin line, which, by the way, is very similar to the size and width of a regular thin line. It's a little bit thicker, being the large print edition. So actually you can see here, they're pretty similar. The ESV is a little bit taller than the Imperial Reference Bible, but similar thickness, both very easy to hold, carry. Now, as I said, this is more like a 8-point font for poetry, 9-point font for prose. This is a 10-point font throughout. But the disadvantage of this ESV is that when you get into the poetry, there's a lot more ghosting than what you see in this Bible. This is line matched, but in the poetry, that ghosting is still pretty noticeable. So in terms of readability, in the prose section, this is probably a little bit more readable than this one. In poetry, because of that ghosting, that's an issue for some people. I would still give the edge to this Bible, but I have to say I really like the fact that this paper here in the older Bible has less ghosting, is more opaque. It's still quite readable. And so another Bible I want to compare it to, you could say is a more modern example of this exact kind of a layout, is the ESV Classic Reference Bible. This is the New Classic Reference Bible. It was printed in 2011. This particular copy I have was printed in the United States of America. So interesting to compare these two, and you can see there's similarity in formatting. The font size is actually pretty much the same. I think they're both about a 9-point font with center column references. When you look at the poetic setting here, the poetry in the ESV is, I think, the same font size as the prose. So they did not condense the font size like they did in the New King James. And as far as paper opacity, I think that the older Bible here is a little bit better opacity than this one. And neither of these is line matched, so that opacity is really important. However, this is not bad. So that's an ESV by Crossway. And as you can see here, as far as form factor, the Classic Reference Bible is actually a little bit taller and a little bit wider. It actually has less pages. It's only 1,252 for the biblical text. This one is about 1,393. So it's interesting that this is actually a thicker Bible. So that just shows you the paper in this is really nice paper, how thin it is and yet how opaque it is. As far as the look of this Bible, the only thing in recent times that looks a lot like it would be the NKJV that is produced by Holman, the ultra slim Bibles. But I think these are actually possibly going out of print. I'm not seeing as many available now. Now this is a large print edition, so it is going to be a taller, wider Bible than the Imperial. If you get a regular size print, it's probably actually going to be a little bit more like this in its size. But as far as just showing you the look of the Bibles, I think you can see here that there's actually similarity, although the line spacing in the Holman is actually a little bit more cramped. It's not bad, but the Imperial is a little bit better in terms of line spacing. And that gives you a look at poetry. So really similar, actually, in terms of the look of each of these Bibles. But I would say the Imperial is a little bit nicer reading experience. Although this is printed really nice and darkly, like the Royal Reference that I showed earlier. I also want to compare this Imperial Reference Bible to the Concord put out by Cambridge. This is a full Yap edition, so that extra leather here, the Yap, makes it look bigger than the text block actually is. But if you look at the text blocks of both of these Bibles, you can actually see they are pretty similar. Now the Concord is an older format that's put out by Cambridge and only in the King James Version. I'm so excited they're going to have something similar to this, and it's going to be a larger pit minion, which is called the Cambridge Diadem. It's due to come out later in 2021, and I think it's going to be really similar to both these size Bibles. And as you can see, they're pretty close in size. The Imperial is a little bit wider, but in terms of thickness, they are really close. And actually, the Concord is a little taller. So Goldilocks size Bibles. Can't wait for the Cambridge Diadem, which is going to be in various translations. So I've shown the Imperial New King James a lot. Let me just show you quickly the Royal Reference, and I'm going to actually compare it to a personal size Bible that is very popular, the Schuyler personal size Quintel. And as you can see, these two really are comparable to each other. Both very personal size Bibles, very easy to carry, a little bit on the small side. The form factor is a little bit different though. The Royal Reference is a little bit wider than the PSQ, but it's a little bit thinner. So the Nelson here is a little thinner than the Schuyler. And I have to say, in the hand, I actually prefer this form factor, even though it's just barely different. I just like that little bit wider, thinner feel. But when you get inside, it's just fascinating to see the different designs here of the interior. They're both double column, but the Schuyler, to me, looks like the print is larger, and the references in the Schuyler are on the bottom, whereas in the Nelson, they're in the center. So a lot of people would say that the Schuyler has a better reading experience to it. Looking at the poetry here. Now I think the opacity in the Royal Reference is actually a little bit better. However, this PSQ, personal size Quintel, is line matched, and the opacity is quite nice. This actually has a lot more pages for the biblical text. I mean, when we get to the book of Revelation, we're already at 1631. So it has a few more hundred pages than the Royal Reference, but you do get that nice font size. Let's also look at how the red is printed in both of these Bibles. I think there's more print consistency with the Quintel, but on these pages here, they're actually both pretty readable. However, because this is line matched, I would actually say this is a little bit better in terms of the red print readability than the Royal Reference. So that gives you a look at a modern comparison of two personal size Bibles. So what you have here really are some real classics. The Royal Reference Bible, the Imperial Reference Bible in the New King James Version. I hope this was as interesting to you as it was to me. It was really fascinating to look at these Bibles, see what they're really like, and then compare them to some other Bibles. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to see those in the comment section below. But thank you so much for taking a look at these Bibles with me from A Frisch Perspective.